All right, so Republicans are once again crying and farting and pissing their pants over the prospect of Joe Biden maybe, potentially, at some point in the future, considering canceling a tiny portion of student debt. So here's the recent context. We're going to get to a little bit of the conservative reactions to this, but basically Joe Biden recently had a meeting with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus where he basically told them, you guys are going to be happy with something that I have coming in the immediate future or in the near future, and he said that he's considering canceling some portion of student debt. Now, pretty much immediately after this, in the following days, he then proceeded to say, no, I'm not actually considering the $50,000 in student debt that has been proposed by, people like Chuck Schumer and Elizabeth Warren, and I'm definitely not considering completely wiping the slate clean as has been proposed by, Bernie Sanders, etc. So it looks like the most likely situation is that he's going to wait a couple months, and then close to the election time, he's going to cancel that $10,000 that he ran on canceling. Now, obviously, this is pathetically inadequate and doesn't go nearly far enough, both in the economic sense of relieving tens of millions of Americans with the burden or the crime of going and getting an education and then being saddled with debt for the rest of their lives. Not only does it not make sense from an economic perspective because you're preventing those people from starting a life, investing in their families, etc. But on top of that, it also isn't going to make much political sense if you're only doing $10,000 of cancellation because that'll be something, it'll be good for people, but it won't be nearly enough to motivate young people to actually show up and vote for you. So it's kind of like he's doing the classic Joe Biden thing here where he kind of goes in the right direction but doesn't even go 1/10 of the actual potential that he has as his power unilaterally as the president of the United States to completely cancel student debt. So it's typical Joe Biden shit, but nonetheless, Republicans proceeded to absolutely lose their goddamn minds over this potential proposition. So just as one example here from Mitt Romney, he says, desperate polls call for desperate measures. Dems consider forgiving trillions in student loans. Well, first off, that's a lie because, as we just saw, Joe Biden isn't considering canceling the entirety of the roughly $1.6 trillion in student debt that is held by like 44 million Americans. So it wouldn't cost trillions of dollars. His plan for like $10,000 of forgiveness costs roughly like $250 to $300 billion. So already it's not trillions of dollars. He's just lying about that. But he says other bribe suggestions: forgive auto loans, forgive credit card debt, forgive mortgages, and put a wealth tax on the super rich to pay for it all. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, yeah, what could possibly go wrong? These all sound like fucking great suggestions. I mean, he was getting absolutely roasted in the replies here by a bunch of leftists who were just pointing out, like, yeah, those all sound like absolutely great things, especially with, things that should be considered a human right with things like a mortgage, right? Everybody should be granted housing in the wealthiest nation on the history of the planet. We shouldn't have people who are, having to rent indefinitely for the rest of their lives, or people who are sleeping out on the streets. It seems like, public investment in all of these different areas that he's talking about here would actually just straight up improve the lives of average Americans. And honestly, this is a perfect perspective in terms of, how pathetic it is that Democrats can't push back against a party that is openly espousing views like this. I mean, listen, you can talk about the logistics and logistical problems surrounding actually canceling, all auto loans or credit card debt, etc. But at the end of the day, these are all just like a populist message, right? Canceling mortgages, canceling auto loans, forgiving credit card debt, forgiving student debt, and taxing the rich to pay for it all. I mean, what the fuck? Those are all fucking great suggestions that I think the vast majority of the American people would be on board with if it was actually put on the table. But nonetheless, you have Republicans who are basically just coming out here in the most elitist way possible and just saying inherently as if, people intuitively understand that these are all scary and terrifying ideas. Like, no, those actually sound, like great suggestions to me. But we had another example here from Laura Ingraham from Fox News, which I think this is not the only type of argument that we hear. We hear this, this type of rhetoric being put forward by conservatives as an opposition to student debt forgiveness all the time. And basically the idea is like, well, what about the, people who came before who paid off their student loans? Or what about people who had to work really hard in order to make this happen? And basically they use that as an excuse to justify perpetually keeping people in that same cycle of suffering. So here from Laura Ingraham, she says, my mom worked as a waitress until she was 73 to help pay for our college, even helped with loan repayment. Loan forgiveness is just another insult to those who play by the rules. So, I mean, what rules? First of all, what rules are you talking about? These are just arbitrary standards that you're putting in place here. There's no rules that say that, the cost of education as it has since the time that Laura Ingraham went to college needs to be skyrocketing by like 1,000%. There's no rules in place that should say as a society that we need to put people into debt for the rest of their lives for the crime of trying to get a higher education. These aren't any actual actual rules within society. She's just saying that as if it's inherent that we have to have this predatory loan system that we have right now. But on top of that, again, she's saying her mom had to work at it as a waitress until she was 73. Nobody's mom should have to fucking do that. I mean, nobody's mom should ever have to do that. And if your mom had to go through that, why would you then turn around and then say, yeah, I just want everybody else's mom to have to go through the same suffering that my family went with? I mean, it's the most like deranged shit you could possibly imagine. And I think that Kyle Kalinske from Secular Talk had a perfect response to this type of a statement from conservatives. So again, it wasn't the only one. We also had here from Cassie Dillon, who said, I just worked my butt off to pay off my very expensive student loans a few months ago. If Biden forgives student loans, I'm going to be livid. Like, why? Why would you be mad at that prospect of other people getting relief? That doesn't negatively impact you in any way whatsoever. It just starts the process of resolving a massive structural systemic issue that we have right now in the country. And you would be livid at that. You would be mad at that. And so here's what Kyle said. He said in 1916, worked my butt off to finish my indentured servitude a few months ago. If they get rid of it, I'm going to be livid. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you're basically just coming out and saying we shouldn't improve society because what about the people who were negatively impacted by those bad structural systems that we had in place before? I mean, it's literally just an argument against progressing or improving as a society. So it's just, completely ridiculous at face value. But we also had a Fox News host again coming out and saying we should not have the government involved in education at all. So this is, tying into student debt cancellation, also tying in to this, conservative reactionary freak out about, trans and LGBT teachers in schools, basically, and trying to criminalize trans existence. And basically, she's just pushing the idea that, no, we shouldn't have any public school system. We should just have private schools, which obviously would have absolutely terrible implications. What about people who can't afford the private school tuitions, etc.? I mean, there's a billion different reasons why this is an absolutely horrible idea, but nonetheless, consistently playing into the same narrative that is being set up by people like Mitt Romney and Laura Ingraham and other reactionary conservatives. So just absolutely deranged shit is being floated out there publicly. But they also had actual legislation that was introduced by Republicans in order to try to prevent Biden from using his power as the president in order to cancel student debt. So there's two sides to this. Number one, it's just the political side of Republicans trying to, block something legislatively from happening that would just be a universal good. But on top of that, they're also admitting that Biden does have the power to actually cancel student debt, which is something that even the Biden administration has been, half-assed denying for basically the entirety of his administration. They've been saying, we have these task forces and we're putting together a committee to look into whether or not we can cancel student debt. They put out that research memo, basically, that was done on specifically his authority to cancel student debt. And I mean, it was literally almost entirely redacted. So even the Biden administration has been pushing back against this idea that he even has the power to cancel student debt. And meanwhile, you have Republicans putting forward legislation like this. So here from the American Prospect, they say 5 Senate Republicans confirmed that President Biden has the authority to suspend, defer, or cancel student debt when they filed a bill on Wednesday to block Biden from carrying it out. And the bill, known as the Stop Reckless Student Loan Actions of 2022, would make direct changes to one of the statutes that Biden can use for the purpose of debt cancellation or deferral. It also states that the executive branch may not suspend or defer student loan payments for longer than 90 days or for individuals who make more than 400% of the poverty line, and the executive branch under the bill also may not cancel the outstanding balances, whether as part of a declared emergency or through any type of executive or regulatory action. So, I mean, they're simultaneously, again, admitting that, yes, Joe Biden does have the unilateral power at his disposal to cancel all student debt, and they're trying to introduce legislation to prevent that from even being able to theoretically happen. And again, this is coming in the context of Biden maybe considering at some point in the future canceling $10,000 worth of student debt. So he's not even scratching the surface of the actual problem of student debt. He's also, completely failing on passing things like his free community college bill that was blocked by Joe Manchin. He's also completely failed on heavily investing in public schools, etc. So they're not addressing any of the underlying issues, but even this tiny amount of crumbs that would be given to student loan borrowers right now who are suffering under this debt is enough to set off Republicans to put out statements like these and to literally introduce legislation to try to prevent that from happening. I mean, they're just fucking reactionary ghouls. But in addition to this, it also obviously comes in the context of Democrats and specifically Joe Biden losing support with young people. So I've been talking about this for months now, but the most significant demographic drop-off in support for Joe Biden has come from young people disproportionately. party. So if you look at that context, what are some of the things that Joe Biden could do to motivate young people to come back in and be motivated to go vote in the 2022 midterms? Well, he could do things like, I don't know, cancel all student debt. But again, if you're just going to go the $10,000 route, then that simultaneously is going to piss off a lot of reactionary Republicans while also not being enough to actually get people motivated. And if you're going to cancel $10,000 worth of student debt, then you also are inherently admitting that you do have the power to cancel all of it. And then you're just looking at young people and you're just saying, well, I could cancel all of your student debt, but I'm just going to do a tiny fraction so you're still saddled with the debt. I mean, it's just, it's a austerity-minded slap in the face to young people, and it wouldn't go nearly far enough. But again, there's a million other things that Biden could try to do, both in a legislative sense and also in an executive order sense, right? He could change the scheduling of marijuana, for example, and decriminalize marijuana in the United States. That would definitely motivate young people. I know it would motivate me to maybe suck it up and go vote, but there are a billion different things that Biden and that Democrats more broadly could be doing right now to stop this slaughter that is inevitably going to come in the 2022 midterms, and they're just completely half-assing it, if even that. I mean, the student loan thing is basically the only real agenda item that Biden has a realistic chance of actually getting done before 2022. I mean, it's just embarrassing that this is what the first 2 years of his administration is looking like, especially when you consider how absolutely deranged Republicans are. And this is why you have to lean in to left-wing economic populism, is because Republicans will immediately start to show their bare ass online and in interviews and all over the country when you just push for bold left-wing legislation. I mean, this is how they react to canceling what they think is going to be all student loans. Imagine how they would react in a defensive nature for health insurance companies if you proposed Medicare for all, or any number of other policies that would actually motivate young people, that would motivate the broad base of working class voters to get behind your party, and would simultaneously expose Republicans, because when they actually have to come out and talk about the substance of their economic beliefs or their economic policy agenda, it's absolutely fucking horrendous and unpopular. So that's what you should lean into. But instead of doing any of that, they're again just kind of half-assing their way through this entire process. And meanwhile, Republicans are using that as an opportunity without any legitimate progressive legislation to be reactionary towards. They're just being reactionary on the culture war issues. And so you inevitably see this drive up in, again, anti-trans, anti-LGBT legislation all around the country. So it's just an honestly pathetic state of politics right now in the United States. But this is what you get when you have a do-nothing president like Joe Biden, who doesn't believe in any substantial systemic change that people actually want.